She's a professor, mentor, and bridge builder between academics and athletics. From her early days as a student athlete studying psychology to serving as a faculty athletic representative for multiple universities, AUM's Dr. Courtney Waid has played a crucial role in shaping the student athlete experience in the Gulf South Conference. Stay tuned to hear Courtney's inspirational story of how her journey has come full circle and impacted lives of countless student athletes. This is Inside the GSC. Today on Inside the GSC, we're joined by Dr. Courtney Waid from AUM, the faculty athletic representative, someone who stands at the intersection of academics, compliance, campus life, student athlete support, and much, much more. She served in the FAR role at multiple institutions and brings a unique background in psychology, research, and teaching. Courtney, thank you again for joining us here on the show today. We appreciate having you on and just being able to talk about your story. And we're looking forward to hearing more about the FAR side of things.
Thank you, Angelo. Thank you for having me.
So first off, we'll start off with the burning question that a lot of people have in collegiate athletics. Everybody knows, for the most part, what an athletic director is. Obviously, coaches, student athletes, even senior woman administrators, sports information director. But if you had to give an elevator pitch on what faculty athletic representative is, how would you explain that to folks?
So the faculty athletic representative on every campus that is involved in NCAA athletics, Division 1, 2, and 3, every campus has a faculty athletic representative, sometimes referred to as the FAR or the FAR. I will a lot of times just say the FAR. But the person who is in this role is essentially, for lack of a better way of saying it, they're in the middle. They're in the middle of the academic side of campus, but then they're also in the middle of the athletic side of campus. And the way I essentially have been able to consider this role is you're an advocate for academics with the athletic department, but you're also an advocate for athletics with the academic affairs side of campus. So you can bring that balance in. You can kind of be that person who, when there needs to be that academic advocacy, and vice versa, when we need to have some advocacy for athletics with academics. And we look at the buckets that we essentially concern ourselves with, and that is life in the balance for student athletes, student athlete well-being, and the academics, which is a big component of what our student athletes are doing. It's not just a big component, it is why they're on our campuses. They're students first.
Absolutely. And that couldn't have said it any better. Obviously that's one of the more important things in those roles, as the athletic director or an SID or anybody who works in athletic administration. It should be about the students' well-being first, because it's a servant job. It's something that you wouldn't be there if you didn't have a passion for serving the student athletes.
Right. Exactly.
So we'll come back to more about the FAR stuff down the show, but we want to first get more into your early academic journeys, your foundations. You go to Kentucky, you study psychology, you were a collegiate athlete, a swimmer as well. You built that career. How did you first get into that role with psychology, and what drew that interest to begin with?
When I was in high school, I knew that I wanted to major in psychology in college. I've always had a science mind, but the harder, more natural sciences didn't appeal to me. And I didn't recognize what about psychology was truly part of my calling until I get into the major. And as a psychology major at Kentucky, I had to take courses we didn't necessarily have this required minor, but we had to kind of build our own cognate area. And somebody who I swam with at Kentucky, who was a social work major, she told me, she said, you got to take deviant behavior. You will love it. And so, to put it as succinctly as I could put anything, and for those who know me know I'm not very succinct, I took that class and the rest was history. So I graduated with a psychology bachelor's degree, but I had also built this cognate area in criminology. And then that's what I ended up pursuing my graduate studies in, with different goals along the way. My trajectory has definitely taken taken some different twists and turns, all great and very enlightening. But I'll probably be able to talk about some of that too.
Through that early on experience, just through criminal justice and the psychology realm, and just being at that collegiate age and trying to get the degrees, what would you say were some of your proud accomplishments during that time that got you to where you ultimately are now?
Proud accomplishments. Well, here's one of the things I will say. In working with student athletes in two Division II schools in this particular role, they're all amazing, and they all do. They're the ones who are like graduating summa cum laude. And I was a good student. I remember being all academic, all SEC, and my dad saying, "Now that's something to be proud of." And so I was a solid student. I had kind of found my footing, knew I wanted to go to graduate school. For me, I was very excited when my journey as a student athlete and doing well enough in undergrad allowed me to, through the connections at the University of Kentucky, to get an academic athletic graduate assistantship at the University of Alabama. So I was what was called an academic grad assistant, where I was working to do class checks and progress reports when I was pursuing my master's degree. And so, while it's not something typical, like I didn't receive a postgraduate scholarship, I didn't, win a particular specific academic award as a student athlete at Kentucky. I couldn't have asked for more than having my graduate education at the University of Alabama completely paid for. I mean, it was really, really a special connection. And I have Bob Bradley at Kentucky to thank for that. And so I get my master's degree completely paid for. And so I'm always been very proud of that. And it facilitated a lot for my family, reduced the stress on them in terms of, and many people my age right now are thinking, how are we going to pay for college? What are we going to do? I have a child that's thinking of postgraduate or professional education. It's expensive. So I was pretty proud of that. And I can talk more about my own experiences as a student athlete. It definitely was wonderful. It was wonderful. I couldn't have asked for more as a swimmer at the University of Kentucky. Growing up in Richmond, Virginia, I swam club level, had a great experience, was able to swim Division I at the time. I will note this: at the time, Division II swimming in the 1990s wasn't necessarily as big as it is now. And it's really huge now. And even I look at Division II, and so I also say I swam in the 1990s, and I realize in the 1990s, if I had someone who's my age now talking to me, they would have been like, "Hey, I played football in the 1960s." Well, that sounds like a long time ago. Now, of course, now that I'm that age, that doesn't seem like a long time ago. But that Division II experience was not what it is today. And I even look at my own father, who he graduates from high school in the 1950s. He's working class, but when he starts his career, he's playing semi-pro baseball. And he probably would have been your quintessential Division II baseball player had those experiences been what they are today for student athletes. So I realize I've kind of told you a good bit about kind of my experience at Kentucky, but it really, for me, it just kind of tags into, what I look at with my dad's experience and my experience growing up, and kind of, I didn't realize it, but it was kind of solidifying for me what I knew I wanted at this point in my career in giving back. I was raised to give back. I can't think of a better way to give back to student athletes than to do what I do in the role of FAR.
Courtney, we know, like even just talking with you, off air and getting to know you over the years, I know that your father has been one of the more influential folks in your life, and just, the impact that he's had for you and who you are as a person, just it's more than what words can describe. But were there other mentors along the way for you during your time at Kentucky and just through grad school in Alabama that have really shaped, who you are and just giving you some wisdom and discernment through your career field and what you wanted to do?
Absolutely. I mean, I even go back to, my club swimming days in Virginia. And I can't even begin to think about how many people, um, I will say this, and I tell student athletes this all the time, especially when I teach the sociology of sport class. I still remember when I started swimming year round, and I was 9 years old, about to turn 10. And I remember my mom saying to me, "You are learning so many lessons these are going to carry you through life." And I remember kind of thinking, "Ugh, she talks about this a lot, like, oh," but she was so right. And just this past weekend, I was at the Faculty Athletic Rep Association annual convention meetings, and a student athlete who won a specific scholarship. She was a swimmer at Tufts University, Division III. And she gets up there and accepts her award. And she's talking about all of these things I had heard all of my life through my experience. And that had really become even more a personal experience for me myself. I almost felt like she was telling my story. She said, "I was done with swimming, but then I went to medical school." And I thought, and I went to grad school, and her experience in medical school of working as a team with her fellow classmates. I'm working with my colleagues on research projects. I'm a cancer survivor, facing that. I still remember the first, surgery I had, major surgery I had about 15 years ago. And I remember my dad saying to me, "You swam 200 butterflies in one day. Like, you've got this." And I'm thinking, you're right. Defending my dissertation, I'm thinking, I've stood behind the starting blocks at big swim meets. So, people are too numerous to name, but I want to name a few people. Of course, my parents, they were both officials, felt very strongly about being involved. They were great officials. My dad was a respected referee. My mother operated the timing system, which was really good for her because she's one of those number science people, right? She loved it. My age group coach, Diane Casey, who has retired, who I always felt like would be a fantastic college coach. But because she didn't have that experience coaching in college, she would share with me, it's harder for me to kind of break into those ranks. My senior coach, Dudley Duncan, who has retired and written a book, which I still need to read and make some time for this holiday season. Um, you know, Very instrumental. Other coaches at the age group level. And then Gary Connolly was the head coach at Kentucky when I swam there, and always very patient and relaxed, always had a relaxed way of approaching things, and had a lot of vision that I don't think we realized at the time. And I've since, commented to Gary, "I have a lot to thank you for. Being a faculty athletic rep, I didn't realize what all you guys were doing, and thank you. I want to thank you for everything that you did, when I was swimming at Kentucky at that collegiate level. And moving on into graduate school, even academically in undergrad, I think of Dr. Kim in the psychology department at Kentucky. I still feel like who I am as a teacher is based on what I learned from Dr. Kim. In graduate school, I had wonderful professors at Alabama, Dr. Ida Johnson, who has since retired. She is somebody who I looked up to and always thought about as I was pursuing my PhD at Florida State, and who I would want to be as a female in academia. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about my major professor from Florida State, who I get so excited about seeing at every American Society of Criminology. Dr. Tom Blomberg, he's now the Dean of the College of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Florida State. And I was so excited about introducing him to my stepson at the recent ASC in Washington, D.C. My stepson is um, a sophomore at George Mason, so he was able to come to the conference. But unfortunately, Dr. Blomberg couldn't be there, so I was really bummed out that I couldn't introduce him. But whether it's academic or athletic, there has been so many people. And honestly, it just points to we can't do any of this alone. And I haven't even mentioned the people who are my colleagues, the people who I consider brothers and sisters who I went to graduate school with at Alabama and Florida State, who we still collaborate on projects with. I have wonderful colleagues from both Northern State and here at AUM that I collaborate with, not just with research, but we do a lot of tossing ideas around about our teaching. And it's great to just have those people to work with.
Absolutely, for sure. And Courtney, speaking of Northern State, after your time and how you got your doctorates at FSU, you get into Northern State, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that was your first opportunity to be the FAR experiences. So talk to us how that came about, what the process was, and just, how did that pretty much come about, or how was that process for you to become the FAR?
So at Northern, I had gotten involved pretty quickly in the academic. So the academic side of campus has a athletic committee, and you have the faculty athletic rep actually at that institution is the chair of that committee, and you have representatives from each academic unit. And pretty quickly, I had become involved. The faculty athletic rep at the time, Sarah Blair, had asked me to consider being involved. And so I got involved pretty quickly and got to know the senior woman administrator, Terry Holmes, who's one of my favorite people in the entire world. We still talk. When we go to convention, we get together and have a few meals and share a cocktail. But we had formed a really good relationship. And then I will never forget this. I was driving to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I was spending the summer with Tarleton State and teaching in their graduate program. I was staying with a friend of mine from grad school, and I get a phone call from my department chair at Northern, and he said, Sarah Blair and her husband have taken jobs at Southern Indiana. We've got to get you positioned to get this faculty athletic representative gig. And so
Wow.
I'll spare the details, but we put things in motion. I reached out to Terry Holmes. We let the president know I was interested, and they had an interview process. And I will tell you, you mentioned my dad. The whole time I was at Northern State, and I'll tell you just as an aside about Northern State, it's kind of like when Lane Kiffin talks about how he needed Ole Miss more than Ole Miss needed him. I needed Northern State more than Northern State needed me. It came up at a point in my career where that was definitely the case. But here I am, I'm 6 years in at Northern, and I'm visiting my dad in the summer. My mother passed in 2013, and I'm visiting my dad. And he tells me, he said, I'm really excited you're going to interview for this. But he goes, I'm kind of worried that if you don't get it, you're just going to be destroyed. And I'm like, well, I said, I don't, we've all taken some hits. I can handle it. But I said, you never know. I just have to accept the fact that I'll interview. And if they have somebody else in mind, or they think someone else is better for the position, I'm just going to have to accept that. But lo and behold, didn't have to worry about that. I interviewed, and they appointed me to the position. And so not soon after I started, COVID hits. So I never attended a Northern Sun intercollegiate conference meeting in person. Unfortunately, we have our summer meetings the same way the GSC does, but we did those all virtually. And what they do there is a particular campus will take turns hosting it in terms of that administrative group leads the meetings. So we had had a change in president at Northern State, and Terry Holmes and I actually led the meetings virtually the summer of 2021. And then we did that virtually for convention in January of 2022. And then I had the opportunity to interview at Auburn at Montgomery. And this is what's really interesting. So a lot of people don't know this. So if anybody from my childhood happens to be listening to this podcast, I was actually born in Montgomery, Alabama. I was born at a hospital that is essentially, if I got in my car now, I could be there in 5 minutes. And so I had it come to a point in my personal life where I could make this decision to leave. And, long story short, I interview for the job, I get the job. And the day that I said goodbye to Terry Holmes, I cried. I said, I am giving up this role as faculty athletic rep. And it has been the most beautiful thing I have ever done in my career. It has been something that has changed me and allowed me to really tap into who I am as a person and do that service I like. As a faculty member, I tell faculty members, as a roughly mid-career, we'll say mid-career, I'm not getting to that late career just yet, but I'll tell new faculty members, service is something that you should really feel good about. Don't get involved in service projects that aren't going to serve you. Do the service that you feel good about, that you're going to get energized with, that you enjoy, because service is why we're it's a big part of why we're here. We're here to teach, do research, and to serve. And I was just, when we were talking crying, it was one of those really emotional cries. And I hugged her goodbye and I said, I'm just concerned I'm going to really regret giving this up. And as we know, though, now I'm the FAR at AUM, so I didn't have a big break in that, and then there was various things that led to that as well, which we'll talk about. But being involved at Northern, and I'm pretty spoiled because Terry Holmes, who is going to be retiring in the next year, she is a wealth of knowledge, and I come here and I'm working with Amber Ray Childers, and she's a wealth of knowledge. And I personally can't ask for more with the people that I work with in these roles as ADs and senior women administrators. They're fabulous people.
One of the things I was more or less interested about, and as you talk about finding AUM and just having that storybook opportunity job, because who wouldn't want to potentially come home to where you were born and just where you first, spent the first few years of your life and just be back in Montgomery. But how did you come across the AUM job? You went through the process of calling, interview, and just take us a little bit more about that transition and how AUM all of a sudden got on your radar.
So I was very fortunate. The department I worked in at Northern State, History and Social Sciences. So as a criminologist, that was my academic home. And wonderful group of people. I miss every single one of them. Several of them have retired in my 3.5 years of being at AUM, but I had always had a great camaraderie with my department chair, Dr. Stephen Usitalo, and his daughter was a swimmer, which is one of the reasons we had connected. And I would be on campus late. He was going to pick up Isabella at the pool, and we really not only were good colleagues, but I considered him a friend and a mentor. And he had always, in the afternoons, he came into my office, and there was one day he's like, you should take a look and see if there's any department chair jobs in the South. And literally we were sitting there, and I'm on my computer and I'm looking at Inside Higher Ed, and inside it's like higheredjobs.com. And I saw there were actually 2 positions. So my dad was living outside of Atlanta at the time in Kennesaw, Georgia. And there was a position at Kennesaw State, and then the AUM position. And funnily enough, about AUM, I still remember there's 2 things about AUM. So when I'm getting my master's degree at Alabama in the late 1990s, there was a girl, Amy Rutland, who I was in school with, who was going to be living in Montgomery that summer, and she took a class at AUM. And I remember her talking about AUM in the program. And then there is somebody who, and so now I'm on faculty with this person. We were teaching assistants at Florida State together. And he's been at AUM since 2011. And I remember when he took the job, I actually said to friends of mine who I do research with and will, sometimes we'll room together at American Society of Criminology and we're around each other a lot. I'm like, Don Chon got a job at AUM. That's a place I wouldn't mind working. And I see the job open and I actually reached out to Don. I said, hey, I see you're hiring a department chair. First of all, if you guys are hiring internally and you're interested, I'm not going to do this out of respect for you. He says, I'm not interested. Please apply. So I applied, and within a month, I was interviewing and I got the offer.
As we kind of dive a little bit deeper about your role in AUM and kind of comparing to what were at when you were at Northern State, it seems like, and forgive the slight ignorance just with the FAR role, but it seems like there would be different day-to-day operations depending on, where you're at campus-wise. So with AUM, what was a little bit different that you're currently working on now compared to when you were at Northern?
I will say, so at AUM, I am so fortunate. One of the things that I love about what we have as resources for athletics at AUM, we have a dedicated academic advisor for student athletes. And that is a thing of beauty because compared to what we had at Northern State, and granted, Northern has a football team. So we had 400 student athletes there, whereas at AUM, we don't have football. So we're looking at roughly 270 max. We have Mallory Hale, who serves as our academic advisor for student athletes, and it is wonderful. We couldn't ask for more because she's got that day-to-day connection, is able to facilitate what we see with that immediate like sending emails to faculty when it comes to student athlete injuries, and she's in close connection with those student athletes. And while I didn't necessarily have that at Northern, a lot more of some of the kind of more micro tasks fell to me, and I can focus more on being in a position where, what does Mallory need from me? What does Amber Ray as senior woman administrator and compliance need from me? And there's a lot of things that are the same. Reaching out to faculty that haven't responded to student athletes in a while, or a student athlete has a question about not being able to make up an assignment when they traveled. Also, student athletes stopping by. There was one day I had a student athlete stop by my office and she's like, is this a good time? I said, now's a great time. I said, in my little cozy corner over here in Clement Hall, I don't see a lot of students, and we have a lot of online classes in criminal justice. So our students have different needs, but I said, come on in. It was really the highlight of my day. So meeting with the student athletes and communicating with faculty if there's a miscommunication, advocating for them. And that is the same, the absolute same. But we're really more, I hesitate to use the word blessed, but we really are blessed to have the resource with advising. I don't know what we would do if we didn't have Mallory in that role.
Speaking of which, with Mallory and just you two coordinating and conjuncting efforts just from an academic side, let's go a little bit deeper into that with the student athletes and what you guys do. How do you approach supporting student athletes academically, and especially for those who are balancing intense schedules, the travel, and just even the level of toughness that each major has at AUM?
Mm-hmm. What you ask is really interesting, and it takes me back to how impressive these student athletes are. And hopefully, if we have student athletes who are listening that remember me from my days at Northern State, and I said it then. I said it before I was a faculty athletic rep. I said it in my days at North Dakota State as a new faculty member 15 plus years ago. Student athletes today are so much more mature. They are more organized. They are more, I think, motivated from an academic perspective. They have a firmer grasp of what they want to do, which is why, we've got life in the balance. We know, I love that commercial that says there's all these student athletes and they're going pro in something other than sports when they graduate. And it makes it easy because they have that maturity and that wiseness that I can tell you, myself, my colleagues, when I swam at Kentucky, we didn't have that. And it makes it easy when the students are great. They're fabulous students. Nothing is easier about my job than when I speak with faculty and say, I don't have to tell you our student athletes are the best students on campus. They are the ones who are showing up. They are completing their assignments. They are communicating with you. So it does make it it's I don't want to say it's easy, but it's facilitatable. And even those that do struggle, because they have so much going on. I'm like, when do they get their rest? When are they able to fit all this in? But they do. They do. And that's why, of course, as I like to say as a sociologist, they are the social dynamite. They have that energy and they have that drive and desire. But another thing that's important for me too, which I'll share with you, is for them to be able to engage with balance. I am right now also pursuing my master's of social work because I can go to Auburn for free. So I'm back in graduate school getting my social work master's. And there's 3 reasons for it. One is the type of work that I do in criminology. It's a natural fit. Another was caring for my father and knowing, hey, I've got a job when I retire from academia if this is something I want to pursue. But student athlete mental health. And, at the FARA convention, I learned there is somebody at Georgia State that's doing student athlete and sports social work. It's going to grow. It's going to grow. I mean, we are, I think, much better about acknowledging that we can tap in with our student athletes, ensure that they're okay and doing what they need to do to be okay.
Absolutely. And just as we're talking about just the student athlete experience and just getting that success realm, let's take it a little bit more of a bigger scope and just look at it from a conference perspective. I know you mentioned
Mhm.
earlier that with that Northern State, you were also just doing a lot of collaborative work and you're doing meetings with your fellow FARs within the Northern Sun. From a Gulf South standpoint, from the FAR perspective, what how would you say the Gulf South Conference has been set apart in terms of some of the things that you've really come to enjoy and just some of the things that they've done compared to when you were at Northern State and the Northern Sun?
And I'm actually glad that you're mentioning both Northern and the Northern Sun, and then of course AUM and the Gulf South. Another thing that I've been so fortunate is, it is of course my own biased opinion that when you look at the NSIC and you look at the Gulf South, 2 of the most respected Division II conferences. I couldn't ask for more. As a matter of fact, when I assumed the role of FAR here, and I meet Matt. He's like, "Oh, you worked," but he has so much respect for Erin Lind. And Erin's wonderful. And Erin tells me, she's like, "You're going to love Matt Wilson," and I'm like, I can't ask for more. I mean, these are professionals who I respect that recognize the great work that others do. Very similar to what we had in the NSIC here in the Gulf South. We have our FAR work group, and we meet separately when we're at our summer meetings. And I like the fact that we meet in May, and it's great. We get to go to a great location too, right? Pensacola Beach, and we have our own discussions and share things, and we've become more communicative. I think Matt will even say we've become more communicative. There's a new crop of us. When I started, there were about 4 or 5 that were taking over for FARs who had retired. And so we're kind of crafting our own work group and allowing it to work for us. And I am comfortable going to any of them with a question. We even have an email group. I can say, hey, I've got a question. This is something I'm wanting us to kind of think about, when we all see each other in December, for those of us that are able to be there. Let's talk about it over a glass of wine or grab a bite to eat. And maybe I'd like to see what you guys are doing on your campuses.
That's a good segue for my next question that I do have for you, Courtney. Um, when you're talking about just the collaboration efforts that you have amongst colleagues and FARs and even other administrators that are at these said meetings, what do you appreciate most about just that collaboration amongst them and just within the relationships that you build within the Gulf South?
That's a great question. And I've never really thought about it, but I've always known this. I think you can bring any problem to the table and, you're not going to be judged. And I do like that. I think, unfortunately, on the academic side, you've got a lot of people who feel like they have imposter syndrome or they don't feel ready for what they're doing. And they may have a challenge that they're wrestling with and they don't feel comfortable going to colleagues about it. And I think and that's one thing I've always appreciated about the athletic side of things is it's everybody's pretty open and honest. There's no tap dancing around things. There's no kind of toning things down. It's, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. And I feel like I can bring an issue forward and no one's going to judge me. Nobody's going to say, well, Courtney, why did you initially react that way? Or are you kidding me? Nobody is going to have that reaction. And I've also learned too, more often than not, somebody has probably handled a similar situation. Absolutely.
For sure. And how has being part of the GSC influenced your work at AUM?
So I really, so we've even talked about different things on, since when we're at, our meetings in May, and we've even at convention, we've shared things related to some of our own struggles with how can um, how can I take the time that I devote to this, reconcile it with the other time that I'm spending with things? Do you recommend that I say go to my department chair or my dean and say I'd like to do more with this? And is it okay if I take a step back and let someone else in the department handle what's going on with some more departmental level things? We've even talked about some of our own, I don't want to say research demands, but requirements that we have. And it's allowed me to share with my colleagues, looking at similar institutions and what's expected academically, even from, we have our academic expectations for student athletes, but what's expected from us in terms of our research goals and research outputs. So I've been able to share that as well.
To that point, being able to be a little bit more vulnerable and just sharing different things within the Gulf South. You mentioned earlier, Courtney, that you were a cancer survivor, and I can't even begin to fathom, what that experience would be like, especially as you're going about your day-to-day operations, your day-to-day responsibilities, and just trying to give back to students and trying to be as positive as you possibly can be while battling something that is quite a big obstacle, for want of better term. So through that process and just with you surviving cancer, if you don't mind sharing just a little bit, kind of just some of the wisdom you gained from it, as well as just maybe some takeaways and just kind of that story and how you were able to overcome that while being able to manage working in academia and just
Mhm.
being the FAR that you are today.
So, yes, to kind of characterize or contextualize, my mother, she was actually a cancer survivor of 5 different types of primary cancer in her life. So, as a very young girl, in fact, when I started swimming, my mom had had 3 major surgeries for her first 3 primary cancers, and kept on keeping on, right? She's showing up at swim meets and operating that timing system maybe doesn't feel that great, but she was very lucky to go 29 years, and then was diagnosed with two primary cancers. Essentially, she could not overcome her uh, some of the pitfalls and some of the complications of a surgery that she had. So we lost her in 2013. But I had known with having my mother experience these things, and she had colon cancer at 42, and so I'm one of those people. I've had the tests that everybody hears that they have to have at age 45 for the first time. I've had those for many, many years. I've had them annually, and now I do them semi-annually. And, and it's just part of what I do. But the type of cancer that I dealt with is very rare. Now, here's the beauty. You have to look at the good side. What I deal with, and I still deal with it, it's malignant, but it doesn't metastasize. So it was never going to threaten my life, but we had to handle it. So I had these two major surgeries, one in 2009, one in 2013. I've been through chemotherapy, I've been through radiation, and I will tell you again, it's like the day that I defended my dissertation, and my dad said to me, there's somebody who swam 200 butterflies in one day at SEC's her senior year, because I had to do a swim off to get into the final that I was going to swim in. And that's what I had to do. I faced it the same way. I will be honest, the second time I went through this, I may not have had the best attitude, but what I learned when I went through it a third time, and I didn't have a surgery. I have elected not to have surgeries on. I have a tumor in my back, and I'm not having that surgically resected, because what we've learned is with this type of connective tissue tumor, and it's called a desmoid tumor, it's very rare, is that your tissues will get angry and form more tissue. So I went through chemotherapy, I had cryoablation on it, and it's essentially not active. I, you know, One of the things I feel like about having been an athlete is I'm tuned into my body and what I can feel about my body that may not be right. And so with that experience early on, I was able to pursue something needs to be looked at. So it's just a part of who I am. I say now I'm going to go to that urn I'll be in, and it'll be with me. Um, but and it's possible we may see that this tumor wants to be active again, and I'll go through another form of treatment. They, even in the years since I did chemotherapy last, which I did it 2018 through 2020, they've come up with more that's innovative, with like immunotherapy and various things with this very rare. It's a 3 in a million thing. So I had the benefits of course, having that student athlete mentality on my side, but I also had the benefit of watching my mother go through these things, and these cancers are largely hereditary. And so I've been through screening and testing and knowing that there's a likelihood. I mean, they think that we have a certain syndrome that allows these cancers to develop. So I've known that. I think, one thing we learn as student athletes too is we're in control of a lot of things. So I take control of my health. I get my screenings and do that. So I definitely think, and even those days when I didn't feel real good, I had to kind of dig down and remind myself, who was that girl that swam those 200 butterflies in one day? You know, who swam that 13,000-yard workout during Christmas training 2 years in a row? I got this.
The power of self-motivation, as they say, right? Just
Yes.
sometimes it's something that, when you think about it from a student athlete mentality, there's just the power that it has. And as we were talking
Mhm.
about mental health earlier, it's amazing what you can do if you know how to say the right positive things to motivate you in right circumstances that can just get you over that hump.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Courtney, before we let you get going, because I know you have a busy schedule amongst you, we have a couple of rapid fire questions we want to fire off to you. So just whatever comes to mind, let us know.
Okay.
First question we have is, one thing student athletes do that always make you smile.
Wow. I'm bad with rapid fire questions because then I overthink it. I think it's, gosh, almost everything they do makes me smile. But I think when they make all of our students on campus feel good, that makes me smile. Like they know not only are they student athletes, but they're students and they're interacting with everybody on campus and everybody's laughing and they get their fellow students who aren't student athletes involved and excited. That makes me smile.
For sure. What's your favorite AUM athletic event to attend?
Oh, that's a tough question to answer too, because oh goodness, I've always liked college volleyball. I like things that are close, even though I'm a big college football fan, of course. I would say I like volleyball, I like basketball, but I love baseball and I love baseball and softball. Gosh, I can't answer that one. That one's tough.
I can also understand if it's a little bit biased, where like after listening to this episode, you might have a couple of student athletes knocking on your door and be like, Courtney, I thought I was your favorite sport, or I thought what we were doing was your favorite.
And I also recognize as a former swimmer, like nobody likes to go to swim. Even my dad would say, when you don't know the kids, it's boring. And so, and I can say that we don't have swimming and diving at AUM. We don't have it in the Gulf South, unfortunately, even though I do want to say this, our Gulf South institutions that sponsor swimming and diving are amazing. They are D2 hot. So, I'm always telling Matt, I think we need to add swimming and diving. Anyway.
Might potentially be another sport to consider expanding, especially with the few schools that do have it already, and just the success
Yes,
like you're mentioning that they have already. It is something that should be on the horizon.
absolutely.
Courtney, every time, whether it's during the holiday season or even after the meetings in Pensacola in May, athletic administration always has a certain method to unwind. What's yours?
Well, I I love the beach. I am a saltwater, love the beach person. Oh, you just, it's my happy place. And so you mentioned our meetings in May and how we unwind. And of course, we're there at the beach. But this year, I was able to drive over to roughly, people talk about 30A in Florida. And my oldest stepdaughter and her husband and our granddaughter and my husband, they drove down from Montgomery and met me. And so we spent 3 days at the beach and it was wonderful. So if you need to send Courtney to a happy place, if it's involves salt water and sand, she's going to be okay.
And then, if you weren't in higher education, if you weren't in the FAR role that you are today, what career could you have seen yourself in?
That's a great question, considering here I am at age 51 and I've gone back to school for the first time in 23 years. I joke about this. I'm wrapping up my first semester of my master's of social work at Auburn. Wonderful thing is if you're an employee at AUM, you can go to AUM, you can take classes at AUM or main campus Auburn for free. For about 10 years, I've done victim advocacy work within my realm of criminology and had kind of grown tired of saying, well, I'm not a social worker. And I kind of have been thinking, with different things, my father passing, not having to be the primary caregiver. I'm like, okay, I'm going to start this. So now, to answer that question now, in a perfect world, I think what my husband and I would like to do, we would like to do a wellness business, where, because his daughter is a nurse, his older daughter, she's a nurse, there's something where we could combine our skills. So once I get that MSW, my husband has an exercise physiology degree from North Alabama. He played football at North Al in the 90s. He is a GSC student athlete. And that would be in a perfect world. But if I wasn't right now, if I wasn't, in academia, I'd probably go full time to finish the MSW and do something in that realm. But I think truly in a perfect world, like aside from now, picking up the MSW, I would be a grant writer. I would write grants. So if you said, hey, we have a position where we want to hire somebody to write some grants for the Gulf South office. Is this something you would like to do? I would just love to. And the reason why I say that is when I was working for Department of Juvenile Justice as a graduate student at Florida State, one of my colleagues in the research office, she said, my dream job would just be to be able to write grants for different entities and then do something to get these projects funded. I mean, I think that would just be phenomenal. I enjoy writing. I'm unlike a lot of my colleagues in academia. Of course, we have to do a lot of writing for our careers, and there are a lot of academics that don't necessarily enjoy writing. I do enjoy writing. I think that's what I'd like to do. So if I was totally self-sufficient, didn't need money, I recognize, y'all might say, hey, we could use somebody for 10 hours a week. Do you want to do this? I would say, yeah, sign me up. 10 hours a week, I'll donate my time to find some grants that the GSC office could benefit from, the member institutions could benefit from. That would be my dream job. But I also answered this question, and I've seen it answered this way too. Like, I can't really think of anything else I'd want to do. So I'm glad I get to do what I want to do.
Absolutely. And obviously that goes without saying. It's really tough to try to figure out, oh, I could have been this or I could have been that when you're in the position that you are right now and you wouldn't want it any other way.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Well, Courtney, we want to thank you again for your time and just sharing with us your story, your experiences as an FAR. And, as we head into the holiday seasons now, I know there's going to be much needed rest, but, we're wishing all the best for you at AUM and, continue to be the influence and the positive impact you are, not just with AUM, but in the GSC as well.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun.
Thanks for tuning into this episode of Inside the GSC. Don't forget to hit like, share, or subscribe wherever content can be found so you won't miss highlights, stories, and more. So long for now, and we'll see you back here next time on Inside the GSC.